Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome. So good to be here today. I hope everyone is doing well. Let me know where you are joining me from. Hello. I know it takes a while, there's a little bit of a delay, but hello. I hope everyone having a nice day. If it's afternoon or evening or night for you, it's so good to be here. So I actually was here last week. I've been going live every single Tuesday, and it's been a lot of fun. So I wanted to go live again. Great to have you. Hi, Ricardo. Nice to have you here. We have Gabriela from Lima in Peru. Very nice. Welcome. How is it in Lima at the moment? I'd love to know. So welcome. Okay, so I'm very excited for today. It is a training, and in these sessions, I like to go through a specific topic. But I know last time we had quite a lot of great discussion. It was all about vocabulary. It's a different training today. But yes, it's always a lot of fun to get your comments and to connect with you. So in this training, it's all about handling difficult situations when you're using English in an international context. So if you're ever feeling like you want to just be more comfortable or confident, or maybe you feel like you're quite comfortable, but you wish you could speak up and be more assertive in how you speak. And you know that there are some different challenges that you face when you're using English in an international context. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be exploring things like the linguistic differences, so the language differences between you and your colleagues. And even if you're working, you're a native English speaker, and so I'm from the UK, and there are some cultural differences that come up, even as a native speaker, when I'm working with teams from the US or Canada or Australia or Singapore, all of these different places where they speak English, and there's still some cultural differences. So it might be that English is actually your first language, and there's still some different barriers that you face. But when English isn't your first language and you're in international context working with clients and stakeholders, then there might be other areas or reasons where you want to kind of feel more comfortable and confident and at ease when you're speaking. So we're looking at what to do of how to speak up and handle situations when you do make mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes, and also how you can overcome some of these language barriers and challenges and just express yourself in a more confident way. So that is today's training. It's all about handling these difficult situations. So yeah, that's a great example. So the Portuguese from Brazil is very different from the Portuguese from Portugal. Exactly. Yeah, it is. I don't speak Portuguese, but even as someone who doesn't speak Portuguese, I can tell the difference. I had a good friend at university who was from Portugal, and when she spoke, it sounded very unusual to me, very different than the Portuguese from Brazil. So even for my ear as a non-Portuguese speaker, I could tell there was quite a difference. And it's just the same. So I do speak Spanish. I actually live in Mexico, and it's very similar, the situation of I used to live in Madrid in Spain, and then I came to Mexico, and I had to learn just the cultural differences of the language, just the actual vocabulary, Mexican slang, and all the different. And I'm sure Gabriela is in Peru, that you have also different language for day-to-day items like food and fruits and vegetables. And it's so interesting, all of these different. I love the diversity of language. But it also comes with some challenges when you're trying to communicate, and especially in a professional situation. If you're living, I don't know if anyone here is actually living in a country where they don't speak the language. So for me, like I said, I'm from England. I'm from the south of England, and I live in Mexico. So there are different challenges that come up for me every day. So I'd love to know, where are you joining? Where are you from? And where are you watching from? Let me know. It might be that it's different. It could be that you are living in the same place where you have always lived. But yeah, so let me know. So just a quick introduction about me. I am a linguist, an English teacher, and communication coach. And I help design and tech professionals to really transform their English speaking fluency and their communication skills, so they can not only survive, but really thrive in their professional career. So I mainly focus on how to confidently express yourself, how to articulate your ideas and your decisions, how to get buy-in for your ideas, how to engage in discussions, and really develop all the strategies and have the tools. So if any difficult situations do ever happen, which they do and they will, you have the tools to handle them. I think that's really key in the kind of the training today, and what I'm all about, what I do. So if this is the first time that you've seen me before, welcome. If you're back to watch me again, I love that you're here. Also, make sure to hit the bell. If you're watching from LinkedIn, if you hit the bell in my profile, you will actually get notified the next time I go live. And I go live every single Tuesday on LinkedIn and also on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, hello and welcome. So yes, that's just a little bit about me and what I do. So I'm just going to take some water. It's very hot today. Very hot in Mexico. Okay. So yeah, what we're looking at is, when working in an international context, there are different barriers that will come up. And I want to just explain a bit of a background of what those barriers, the cultural barriers and the different barriers are. And I have spoken a little bit about them already. So, and a big part of this is how language and culture, they're very closely connected and very powerfully connected. And that is why it is different in, all of the different cultures in Brazil that come with the language. And it's the same in Mexico. It's the same, in all of the different cultures of the language. They're very closely tied to the differences. And culturally, that can be things like politeness or understanding of people's behavior and why we might behave in a certain way. So language is very closely connected to that, and the language that we use, even if it's the same language, just like Portuguese in Brazil and Portugal, or Spanish in Peru and Spain and Argentina and Mexico and all of the different countries. So really, understanding of culture is very understanding of any language. And what's important is how we understand different messages. Now, a message is anything that anyone says, or it could be nonverbal. So it could be hand gestures and our body language. And anything that we say or write is a message, what I refer to a message. So we do have a lot of things in common, but also there are some cultural differences that separate us in our understanding of how we should behave, and particularly in a professional context. What might be expected when you're working with a team in the UK might be different than the team that you're working with in Europe or in the US. And even within the whole country of the US, it's massive. So even within between cities and the also industry, there are different cultural expectations or how you might behave and communicate. So really, the aim of language is to communicate your meaning and to get your ideas and thoughts across to others. So really, when we develop our language skills, the main purpose is to communicate and interact with others. And we have to know that actually it goes beyond the words that we're using and the words and the language. So you can have a really good level of English. And I see this all the time. I have many clients in my Fluent Club community and that will say, had a really good level of English. I think, I've been studying English for a really long time, but I've just started a new job. Or I just moved to the UK and I feel like my English is getting worse. Or it was a bit of a shock because maybe my English isn't as good as I was expecting. So that can definitely happen, and there are some reasons for that. And it's not just your language, but like I said, how you understand and how to behave in certain situations. So when I talk about a barrier is really any obstacle in the way of achieving communication success. And I say success because communication success is really when the person understands your message and understands when we communicate. So that is a barrier. And we have many different types of barriers. One of them is the socio-cultural barrier. So the social culture, for example, in some cultures, the messages that we share are indirect. So instead of a great example, I'd love to hear an example from you in your country and how, but I can give you an example. And living in Mexico, I, in the beginning, learned a few things. Firstly, that Mexicans don't like to say no. And if someone comes up to you and maybe offers you something and they give you, a leaflet and say, hey, like come to my shop, everyone will just say, thank you, gracias, thank you. They will not say no, thank you. And that's because culturally, it's typically more indirect in the way that they like to communicate. So if someone says, I will come back later, they're probably just being very polite. And actually they're saying, no, thank you. No, but they don't like to use the word no. So that is just one example of my experience living in Mexico, that if someone tells you something, actually the meaning can be very different. Just like if someone says, maybe, it's usually no. And they don't like to say no directly. So I'd love to know if you have any examples of that. Is that the same for you where you live? Or do you like to use the word no and say it how it is? Are you more direct in your communication? I'd love to know how it is for you. And if I said maybe, is that a no? Or is it maybe a maybe? Or is it a yes? It's just one word, but it can be quite confusing. So it's just one example of something that comes up. Now, another thing that a story actually of one of my clients, again, she was actually from Mexico and she was living in San Francisco. She had a job at a tech company in San Francisco, really big company, and she was working in person. And once she met her manager and they were talking about the different changes to a project that they were working on. And at the end of the meeting, the manager says, okay, let's do this for next week. But the manager didn't clarify that actually she wanted my client to do the work and that they had this discussion, but she didn't say, okay, let's do this for next week. Now, the translation was, you need to do this for next week. And they both assumed that, my colleague, she was thinking, okay, my manager will do this. and her manager was thinking that she will do it. So they both assumed, and what happened is next week, they both said, where's the work? You didn't do this. I thought you were doing this. No, you were doing it. And luckily her manager was very understanding. And that was before she was working with me. But if situations like that ever happen, it's always important to just really ask is, okay, just to clarify, you're going to do these tasks or am I? Because the words that she used, the understanding, the deeper meaning was you are going to do these tasks for next week. But what she actually said was, okay, let's do this for next week. So she thought that both of them were working on it or the other person. So the number one takeaway here is don't assume, especially in an international context, because it wasn't a language barrier as such. It wasn't her English that was the mistake. It was just the social cultural misunderstanding. That was the barrier. So, okay, let's see, Ricardo, thanks for sharing. In Brazil, we often use negative words for a positive response, like, are you going to the party tonight? Ah, okay, so, but it actually means, yes, I am. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's kind of implying, yes, I am, but you're just double checking, but you don't really need to ask. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. It's so interesting how it can be different in different countries and places. So yeah, very cool. Okay. So we have the example where I shared of more of the social cultural barrier, where the difference could be the directness of your language and the indirectness. And that's something to really consider. And then we also have a language barrier itself. So we'll give you some examples, but a language barrier can be because of a misunderstanding in the language. So if English is not your first language and you're speaking with someone who shares something and there's a misunderstanding, a confusion, a lost in translation. And this can be because maybe a misunderstanding of the language, or maybe for you, you're using incorrect usages of phrases or slang that might not really make sense in the specific context. So a language barrier, it might be that you start, and even it might not always be because it's a foreign language. So for example, if I was to start at a new job, a new company, and the company might have its own company culture and its own language. So if they might name their meetings a particular way, like a stand-up, but they might give it a particular name. And I'm unfamiliar because I haven't really, the language that they're using to describe different meetings and events and how they name things might be different to my previous company. And it's not really an issue because English isn't my first language, but it's a language barrier because everyone has their own style of communicating in companies and the way that they explain things. So when you start in a new role, it can be, wait, what are you referring to? Is this what you mean? And you might have to clarify all of the different names and unfamiliar language and terminology that people are using. Now, sometimes that can also be that people will use acronyms, and instead of saying exactly what it is, they will describe it as acronym or specific jargon that may not be universally understood. So you have to be careful when you're working in a company in an international context to avoid using too much jargon, depending on who you're speaking with, because it could cause some confusion. So another thing is you might someone might use different idioms or language. So one example I can think of is, can you give me a hand? Can you give me a hand? Not literally. So the literal expression is take my hand. Here is my hand. But really, it means I'm asking for help. Can you help me with this? So it might be you're not familiar with that expression. Think, what are you talking about? So that's the literal meaning versus the figurative meaning. That can be a little bit confusing too. Okay, Ricardo says it really depends on the tone. Non-native people would never get it at first. Yeah, exactly. It's really the nuances of the language. Its tone is important, and I think also in this case it's body language, and it's really looking. One thing in British English is that we like to use sarcasm, and we're generally very sarcastic. And actually, someone in my Fluent Club community, she said, I'm working with someone from the UK. He's from the north of England. And I can never understand if he's being serious, if he's being rude, or if he is just joking and he's very sarcastic. And humor and the different, sarcasm can be very difficult to understand, even if you are a very high, even as a native speaker, really as a high fluent speaker, it can be very challenging, like you said, for sure. Yeah, I love that. Now, another barrier might not always apply, but one could be a physical barrier. And it's important to bring it up because in an international context, you are probably going to work or you are working with people who you aren't physically with. So it might be that you go to the office and you have people from lots of different countries, but it's more likely that when you work in an international position, it's a remote company. So you're working with people who are located in different continents, different time zones. So a physical barrier can be due to your environment and the use of the communication channel that you're using. So things like if you're not physically together in the office, you will have to communicate through emails and video calls or Slack messages. So the communication, there can be the physical barrier, which can make it even more difficult to communicate. And one thing for me, especially, when I have to speak in Spanish on the phone, I find it a lot more challenging. And it's probably the same for you in English. You aren't able to see the person. It's harder to really read the tone and to communicate and to understand. So for me, it's harder to really understand exactly what the person wants when it's not an in-person conversation, or I can see their face. But yeah, that's definitely the case for me in Spanish. So yeah, that's a physical barrier. We can also have, and this is where it doesn't just apply to English, but it's your perceptual barrier. So the communication misunderstanding. And what this relates to is when you make an assumption or you stereotype and you make a misunderstanding based on your own experiences and how your experiences might be different from the other person that you're working with in an international context. And like I said, this one doesn't apply to English, but really just communication in general. So the misunderstanding can come from someone's body language. It can be their facial expression. It can be their gestures that they're using. It can be the tone or the language. But there can be a few different reasons why this happens. So one thing is the cultural misunderstanding. And I remember one of my first ever Spanish lessons. And my teacher was from Spain, and he made everybody stand up in the classroom. I was in high school, and he said, okay, when you're in Spain, you will stand quite close together. And when you're speaking with someone, the proximity of how close they will stand, their face is very close to you. You will speak quite close to that person. Now, as someone from the UK who is British, that is quite uncomfortable for someone who is not used to that. And it might be that the person from the UK will start to step away and move away, and the Spanish person will come closer and closer. And it might be the Spanish person is thinking, this person is rude. Like, what's wrong? You need to come closer. But the English person, the British person is thinking, you're getting too close. This is my safe space. So that can be a perceptual barrier of a stereotype or a cultural misunderstanding when it comes to just one example. And there's lots of different examples like that. Things like eye contact, of how eye contact is seen in English-speaking countries versus other places, and the meaning of that. So one thing is eye contact, especially for English speakers, and I'm talking those especially in the UK and the US. I don't want to speak to the whole English-speaking population, but one thing is when you're speaking and you're looking at someone in the eye, which is important in Western culture typically. But one thing when it comes to looking at someone in the eye, if you're looking away from them, one thing that I might believe as an English speaker is, I can't trust you. You're not very trustworthy. So looking at someone in the eye means I am telling you the truth. I am honest. And it might have lots of different meanings depending on where you're from. So if you are looking away, it might be that I'm reading this as you're not telling me the truth. Are you lying to me? So that can be also another misunderstanding. So there's quite a lot of different misunderstandings of different areas that we've spoken about. I just want to recap. So we have looked at the socio-cultural barriers and misunderstandings. So how messages and the way we speak could be direct or very indirect. Another way is the actual language that you use. You might use incorrect phrases, or it might be that it's not incorrect, it's just not appropriate to the situation. So you're using slang when actually there's a more professional way of saying something. So that could be another reason. Another barrier could be a physical barrier when you're working in an international context, that you are speaking with someone who isn't physically with you in the office, so you have to speak by email and communicate in a different format, and that can cause different challenges. And then we also have perceptual barriers, so things like cultural differences of how you might communicate, and your gestures, facial expressions, and your tone might vary. So those are just not all of them, but the majority of the different barriers. There are actually more that I won't have time to go into all of the different barriers that can happen. But what can you do when this happens? Now, I have hinted to some different techniques of what you can do. For example, if the situation with the cultural misunderstanding, like I said, with the client that I had, for her, when she was speaking with her manager, she assumed by saying, okay, let's do this next week, there was an assumption there. So if you're ever unsure, if you're not 100%, it is always best to check, to say, okay, can I just clarify this? And it shouldn't take very long. Can I just clarify this is what you would like me to do? Okay, so by next week, I am going to be doing this, and just repeating the expectation. And then they will be able to say, oh no, that's not quite right. I can do this for you, but this is what I'm expecting. And really just having that conversation and checking that there is that clarification and everything is, there's no presumptions. So there's just one idea of what you can do, is just double checking to make sure that there isn't that misunderstanding. Now, I know that isn't always possible. I don't think we have quite a lot of with you live today. We have, let's see if anyone has any comments. But yeah, I would love to hear if there are any particular barriers that you can share or anything that's come up like that. And it doesn't even have to be in English. It could be, like Ricardo said, it could be that you're speaking with someone from Portugal and there are some slight differences, or it could be that you're speaking to another Spanish speaker and there are some of these differences. So it doesn't always relate to English, and there's other reasons. So I hope that's the takeaway for today's session. We really covered the different barriers that come up with our communication and language. And they are two separate things, but they are very powerfully connected and important. It's not just about learning English from a book and understanding grammar and vocabulary and thinking I can listen to music or I can watch TV series. And last week we looked at that, of how it can be helpful to do that when you are speaking and learning and to be immersed in English. That's very great for your language skills. But when it comes to people and speaking with people in a team, that's when you really want to be also thinking about cultural differences and how we might react in particular situations, and understanding the deeper messages that people are sharing with you. So I think I will wrap it up here. I will be going live again next week at the same time. And thank you for joining today. We usually go for around 30 minutes. I think it's been more than 30 minutes. So hopefully that was interesting, and you had some, if you had any takeaways, you're watching the replay, make sure to post a comment and let me know. And like I said, if it's the first time that you've seen me and that you've joined me, make sure to hit the bell within my profile and you will be reminded the next time that I go live. Like I said, I will be going live next Tuesday on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Also, if you are interested in how I can support you too, if you work in an international environment and you would like any support with your, like I said, language, but also your communication, then I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to send me a message. You might also be interested, and I will share the link to hear about the Fluent Club. The Fluent Club is a community that I have for design and tech professionals, where I help those working in the international environments to really reach a higher level of fluency, to be more comfortable and confident in their English, especially in an international environment. So any questions that you have, please feel free to reach out or write a comment and I will definitely get back to you. Looks like thanks for joining to Ricardo. It's good to have all of your messages. So I speak English since a kid. Once I worked as a translator at an event, it was very challenging and also a good experience. Looking for my first opportunity to work in an international project. Amazing. Yeah. And what was it that you translated? Was it English and Portuguese? Really fascinating. But yeah, exciting. Looking for your opportunity to work in an international environment. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for joining and for joining on YouTube. I know that it can be difficult on LinkedIn. So I'm really glad that you're able to join and watch um, on YouTube. So thank you. I believe you are in Cuba. You have to remind me that. Thanks so much. Okay, yeah, translating English to Portuguese. Oh, wow. That is difficult. And I would say, even as someone who can speak at a high level, for example, of English and Portuguese, or English and Spanish, or English and Arabic, or whatever language you speak, being able to translate is a very specific skill. And I have a very good friend who is a translator, but she has had to take a lot of training to become a translator, and to be able to do that from Spanish to English. And I recently asked if she could translate the other way around, and she said no. So it's especially at a very advanced level to do that with, yeah, like you said, at an aviation congress. Oh wow, that sounds very tricky. I imagine it was very difficult. But yeah, and a lot of reasons, it's not the language itself, but like I said, the deeper understanding of, does this phrase, does this sentence make sense, not just in the language itself, but in the context and culturally, and also with the people that I'm speaking to, um, in a professional environment. And the language that I use with my friends is very different, with my family, the language I use with my colleagues, my co-workers, with my clients, with your children, with, your grandparents, is all very different. Awesome. That's so nice. You're in Cuba. Great to have you and join us on YouTube. I love that. Very interesting to have such a diverse community, and to get all of your different insights, and for sharing what you have today. So thank you. I will wrap up now, but like I said, if you have any questions, please feel to reach out, write a comment. If you're watching the replay, I will get back to you. And thank you so much for joining, and I will see you next week at the same. I believe I might do it a little bit earlier, because last week we had a lot more people. I think it's a little bit late for some people. It's almost, 20 to 10 in the UK, 11 p.m. in Europe. So I think next time we'll do it just a little bit earlier, but I will be live next week. And like I said, if you click the bell in my profile, it will let you know when I'm live. So thank you, everybody. I will see you all very soon. Bye.